Sis cut me from Christmas because her surgeon boyfriend, so I cut her funding. My name's Zach. I'm 35 years old and I live in Seattle. I run my own web development company, fully remote, fully mine. What started as a side hustle back in my 20s slowly grew into something serious. I now manage a small but tight-knit team of 6 full-time employees and a few contractors we bring in when needed. Last year, we crossed 7 figures in revenue, and that felt surreal. This thing I built in my apartment over energy drinks and takeout boxes now pays other people's salaries. That's wild to me. I love what I do. Genuinely. Writing code, solving client problems, building custom platforms from scratch. It scratches every itch I've got. Creative, logical, constantly evolving. It's exactly where I want to be. I get to wake up every morning and work in sweatpants, take midday walks when the sun's out, and never miss a Seahawks game if I don't want to. I'm not saying it's all perfect. I've had my fair share of stress, tight deadlines, demanding clients, late payments, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. But here's the kicker. My family doesn't see it that way. To them, I might as well be unemployed. My parents, especially my mom, never got over the fact that I didn't go into something real. In their eyes, web development is this ambiguous tech nonsense. Never mind the money, the freedom, the fact that I'm building something of my own, none of that counts. To them, prestige is everything. My dad is a cardiologist, and my mom was a high school principal until she retired early. My older brother, Greg, followed in Dad's footsteps and became a surgeon. My younger sister, Lauren, is a lawyer. Sunday dinners used to feel like status reports. Greg talking about surgery, Lauren about her latest case, and then me. Oh, Zach's still doing his website thing. That's how Mom puts it. Website thing. Like I'm messing around on Tumblr. I used to try to explain what I do. I talk about the clients I work with, the platforms I build, the kinds of problems we solve, but their eyes would glaze over, and then someone would change the subject. Eventually, I stopped trying. It never really mattered that I was making more than Greg and Lauren combined. It didn't matter that I'd never once asked them for help with anything. All that mattered was that I wasn't wearing a suit or working in a hospital or a courtroom. I was the odd one out. The disappointment with a home office. I kept my distance. I didn't cut them off, but I stopped going home for holidays. I sent gifts, joined the occasional Zoom call, but I wasn't flying back to Ohio just to get side-eyed at the dinner table. I figured that was fine. They had their world, and I had mine. We could coexist without rubbing each other raw. Then last spring, I got a call from Greg. It was weird right away. We haven't been close since we were kids, and he rarely calls unless something's wrong. At first, I thought maybe something had happened to Dad. But no, he sounded excited. "Hey man," he said. "I've got a proposal for you." I was already bracing for some favor or awkward pitch, but I didn't expect what came next. "So, Lauren and I are looking at this property. A house in Bainbridge Island. Needs a lot of work, but the location's killer. We're thinking of flipping it. Well, turning it into an Airbnb actually. Split the investment, split the profits. We want you in." I blinked, genuinely confused. "You want me to go in on a rental property with you?" "Exactly. You're doing well, right?" We figured it'd be a good opportunity for all of us. That should have been a red flag. They'd never cared about my financial situation before. Why suddenly now? Still, I asked questions. A lot of them. Greg fumbled a bit with the answers but eventually said he'd send me the listing and some numbers. The next day, Lauren followed up with this email that looked like it was copy-pasted from a realtor's site. Nothing about projected revenue, no business plan, no details on who was managing what. Just vague enthusiasm and a bunch of assumptions. I told them I needed time to think. Which, in our family, apparently means I'm betraying them. Because not even 2 days later, I get a text from Mom. "I can't believe you're being so selfish. Your brother and sister are trying to include you in something important, and you're treating them like strangers." I stared at my phone in disbelief. What? Selfish? For not immediately throwing thousands of dollars into a half-baked idea with no transparency? So I did what I always do. I stepped back. I didn't argue, didn't escalate. I just stopped responding. That's when the real drama started. Lauren sent me this long email basically accusing me of never supporting the family, of thinking I was better than everyone just because I lived in Seattle. Greg jumped on the same bandwagon. Said I had lost touch, that I was isolating myself on purpose. The icing on the cake? My parents backed them up. "You've always been too independent for your own good," Mom wrote. Family means compromise. Compromise. Like investing in a random house I'd never seen, for a project they hadn't even properly planned? I told them no. Politely. Firmly. I said I didn't think the investment made sense, but I wished them luck. That was it. They didn't respond. No replies, no calls, nothing. Mother's Day came. I sent flowers. No thank you. Lauren's birthday, I mailed a gift. Never heard a word. It was like I'd been blacklisted for having the audacity to not get on board with their little family project. Months passed. I focused on my company. We landed a huge client in July, and I took my team to a beach house in Oregon for a mini retreat. Life was good. Quiet, peaceful, drama-free. Until last week. Out of nowhere, I get a call from Dad. He never calls. I didn't even recognize the number. He sounded humble. Which was new. Zach, hey. How are things? I was skeptical but civil. We made small talk for a bit, then he dropped the act. So, listen, he said. About the Bainbridge property. It's not going as smoothly as they'd hope. They might need a little help getting things finished. There it was. I nearly laughed. They need money? Not just money, he said. They thought maybe you could take a look. Maybe use your tech skills to help them market it. Build a site. Handle the bookings. I felt something harden in my chest. You mean now you need me? He didn't deny it. We made mistakes, he said. But family helps family. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I said, funny how that works. And I hung up. My sister's 28 and currently finishing her final year at a private dental school in Boston. And before anyone asks, yes, it's as expensive as it sounds. Tuition, fees, housing, books, lab costs, even the extra stuff they don't advertise up front, it all adds up. And you know who's been paying for all of it? Me. More than 3 years ago, Melanie called me in a panic. She'd just been accepted into the program, and it was her dream, her absolute dream. She was crying happy tears on the phone, saying things like, I can't believe it's actually happening. Then came the part she tried to ease into. She said she didn't know how she was going to afford it. That mom and dad couldn't co-sign more loans without risking their retirement, and federal aid wouldn't even cover a quarter of it. She was talking fast, almost rambling, and I knew what was coming before she said it. Zach, I know this is a lot to ask, but is there any way you could help? At the time, I didn't even hesitate. She was my little sister, and she had worked hard to get into that program. I remember thinking, I've got the money, and if helping her now sets her up for a successful future, then why not? So I said yes. I didn't realize what I was agreeing to. First year tuition alone was close to $70,000. Then add in her off-campus rent, which ran about $2,000 a month. Books and supplies were another few grand. There were unexpected costs too, clinic fees, exam prep courses, even a summer program she said was critical for networking. I was swiping my card, wiring transfers, paying invoices with zero questions asked. If she needed it, I covered it. That first year, I spent just under $78,000. Year 2 was more of the same. She moved to a slightly cheaper apartment, but tuition went up. Add in a laptop replacement, board exam fees, and 2 round-trip flights for interviews and externships, and I was another $70,000 deep. This year, I crossed the $215,000 mark. And there are still a few months to go before she graduates. It's not that I regret it, at least I didn't. Not then. But it's the way my family handled it that gets under my skin. They praised Melanie endlessly. Mom would say things like, we're so proud of our future doctor. And Dad would constantly remind people that Melanie's the brains of the family. Meanwhile, not once, literally not once, did they acknowledge who was footing the bill. You'd think maybe a thank you card, or a public nod at dinner. Hell, even a casual, Zach's been helping out a lot, would have been nice. But no. Total silence. It was like they wanted to pretend the money was coming from some magical, faceless fund, instead of the brother they couldn't bother to defend when Greg and Lauren turned on him. It wasn't just the silence, it was the entitlement. Melanie started texting me like I was her bank. Hey, rent's due, need another $1,000 for my licensure exam, do you mind sending something extra for groceries this month? Never a can you, never a thank you. Just assumed I'd handle it. And for a while I did. I kept telling myself, she's under pressure, she's focused on school, she'll show gratitude when it's over. But it kept piling up. This quiet, unspoken debt that no one wanted to acknowledge except me, the guy who was paying it. The worst part came after I said no to Greg and Lauren's Airbnb project. Melanie didn't say anything right away. I figured she was smart enough to stay out of it. But then I got a Venmo request. $3,500. Just said, tuition balance. No message, no explanation. Like I was some automated scholarship fund. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. And a couple days later, she texted. Hey, did you see my request? I need it by Friday or there's a late fee. No, how are you? No, is now a good time. Just a deadline. I stared at my phone for a solid minute before responding. Melanie, I've already paid over 200 grand for your education. I think it's time we have a real conversation about what's going on here. She didn't reply for almost a day. When she did, it was a long paragraph about how I was being dramatic, how I'd never said there was a limit, how she was under so much stress and didn't have time for guilt trip. That hit me harder than I expected. Because I wasn't trying to guilt her, I just wanted her to acknowledge it. To stop pretending this was all happening in a vacuum. I didn't send the money. For the first time in 3.5 years, I didn't pay. A week later, Mom called me. First time in months. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't mention the Airbnb fallout. She launched straight into it. I heard you're not helping Melanie anymore. Is something going on? I couldn't believe it. The sheer audacity. After all this time, after everything I've done, she was calling to guilt me about tuition? I told her the truth. That I'd been covering Melanie's education for years. That I'd never asked for recognition, but I was done being treated like an ATM with no feelings. That maybe, just maybe, I needed a little support too. She got quiet. Then she said the words that made me hang up. Well, that's what family does. We support each other. I hung up without another word. Funny how that only seems to apply when I'm the one doing the giving. So it was Christmas Eve. I was sitting at my desk wrapping up a few end-of-year client invoices, sipping a mug of coffee, thinking I might actually relax for once. I hadn't made any holiday plans. I hadn't even decorated the apartment. After the whole Airbnb fallout and everything with Melanie, the idea of flying home to Ohio didn't exactly fill me with joy. Still, part of me figured there might be a last-minute text from Dad or some awkward message from Greg, maybe even a generic Merry Christmas group chat that included me by mistake. What I didn't expect was a call from my mom. Her name popped up on my screen around 6:45 p.m., just as I was thinking about ordering Thai food and binging a few episodes of something mindless on Netflix. I let it ring twice before picking up. Hey, I said, already guarded. Hi Zach, she replied. Her tone was tight, polite in that clipped, formal way people use when they're about to say something awful and don't want to sound too emotional doing it. There was a pause. Then she said, I just wanted to let you know, you're not invited to Christmas dinner tomorrow. I actually laughed, thinking maybe it was some bizarre attempt at humor. What? We've decided it's best if you don't come, she said. Just for this year. I was still trying to process. Wait, what are you talking about? I wasn't planning on flying in, but you're saying I'm not even invited. Yes, she said, clearly uncomfortable but still resolute. It's just, with everything that's happened, we thought it would be easier for everyone if you sat this one out. No hard feelings. No hard feelings? I repeated. You're telling your son, on Christmas Eve, that he's not welcome because it would be easier for everyone? She sighed like I was the one being difficult. Zach, please. It's just been a complicated year. We don't want to have any unnecessary tension. It's not personal. Not personal? I said, standing up from my chair. So I get cut out of Greg and Lauren's scam project. I pay over 200 grand for Melanie's school without so much as a thank you, and now I'm the source of tension? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice dropped into that patronizing tone she always used when I stepped out of line growing up. We just don't want to embarrass anyone. Embarrass, I echoed, my voice flat. Yes, she said. You've made things uncomfortable. With your attitude. With the way you've distanced yourself. Melanie's going to be there. So are your siblings. We don't want a scene. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wasn't being uninvited because I did anything wrong. I was being uninvited because they were afraid I might make them feel bad. Like my presence alone was enough to shame them. I hadn't even planned on coming, but that wasn't the point. They wanted it on the record. They wanted me to know that even if I had shown up, I wouldn't be let in. Thanks for the call, I said finally. Merry Christmas. I hung up before she could say anything else, and then I just sat there in my apartment, alone, with a half-finished spreadsheet open on one monitor and the city lights flickering through the window behind me. It was so quiet it actually hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't throw anything or text anyone or write some dramatic email. I just sat there. The weirdest part was how calm I felt. Like I'd finally hit this place where none of it surprised me anymore. Where the people I was supposed to count on had made it abundantly clear that their comfort was more important than their connection to me. I ended up ordering that Thai food. Watched a documentary. Opened the bottle of bourbon I'd been saving for New Year's. And when Christmas morning rolled around, I didn't even check my phone. It was about a week after Christmas. I was getting ready to close things down for the year, finalizing some Q4 reports and cleaning up invoices. Life was quiet. No calls from the family, no messages, just the usual silence. I'd already accepted that they had iced me out of the holidays and moved on. Or so I thought. Then I got a message from my cousin Kayla. She and I had never been super close, but we'd always gotten along better than I did with most of the family. She's a few years younger than me and has always had a good head on her shoulders. So when she texted me asking if I had time to talk, I didn't ignore it. We hopped on a call later that evening. She sounded nervous. Hesitant. The kind of nervous that tells you someone's about to drop a bomb. I didn't know if I should tell you this, she started, but honestly, it's been bothering me since Christmas. I leaned back in my chair. Tell me what? It's about why you weren't invited, she said. To dinner. I told her I already knew. It was supposedly to avoid tension and embarrassment. Kayla made this sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Yeah, that's not exactly the whole story. What is the whole story then? She paused. Melanie didn't want you there. I froze. What? She told your parents it would be a bad look, Kayla said. That having you around would give the wrong impression. Especially to Austin. That name rang a bell. Austin, her boyfriend? Yeah. He's a surgeon. Works at some private hospital in Boston. Comes from a big-shot family, old money, I think. Melanie's been trying really hard to impress them. Apparently, she thought your job would make things awkward. I didn't respond right away. I felt something tighten in my chest. Kayla went on. She said you worked in tech but not in a real way. That your company wasn't corporate enough. That it wouldn't reflect well on the family. She told your parents you'd make things uncomfortable. That you'd say something inappropriate or wear the wrong thing or just not fit in with Austin's people. I just sat there stunned. All that crap about avoiding tension, about embarrassment, about keeping the peace, none of it had anything to do with me starting a fight or ruining Christmas. It was because my sister was ashamed of me. Ashamed of the brother who'd paid her tuition, covered her rent, funded her dreams. Ashamed because I didn't wear a white coat or have a last name that made people raise their eyebrows in admiration. She really said that? I asked just to hear it again. Kayla didn't hesitate. Yeah, I was there. I overheard the conversation. Your mom was hesitant at first, but Melanie insisted. Said she didn't want to risk anything messing up her image in front of Austin. It felt like a gut punch. I had already been dealing with the sting of being shut out, but this was something else. This was betrayal dressed up as family politics. This wasn't about avoiding a scene, it was about keeping up appearances. She said your business wasn't real, Kayla added quietly. That you were just playing around on the internet. That part hit harder than I expected. Not because it was the first time I'd heard something like it. My family had been brushing off my work for years. But to know that she weaponized that narrative, to humiliate me, to erase me from a holiday gathering because I didn't measure up to her boyfriend's world, was something else entirely. I thanked Kayla for telling me. She apologized, said she didn't agree with it, but didn't feel like she could say anything at the time. I didn't blame her. I appreciated that she told me it all. After the call, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the floor. Not angry. Not even shocked anymore. Just hollow. I thought about all the money I'd wired her over the years. All the times I'd answered the phone when she called, panicked about some deadline or fee or last-minute change. I thought about the years I spent putting her ahead of my own plans. And now, because I didn't fit into the image she wanted to present to some doctor with a fancy last name, I was cut out, erased, not even spoken about, just removed like I was the wrinkle in an otherwise polished photo. It's funny. All those times I brushed off my family's dismissiveness, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I just needed to be patient. But this time, it was undeniable. They didn't just fail to see my value. They actively decided I didn't have any. After that phone call with Kayla, something snapped in me. Not suddenly. Not like a light switch. It was more like an old wound that I had ignored for years finally flaring up in a way I couldn't push aside anymore. 4 days after, I kept going over every moment that should have told me this was coming. Every time Melanie brushed me off. Every time I showed up for her and got nothing in return. There was that fundraiser her dental program held in her first year. She told me about it last minute, and I still cleared my schedule to fly out to Boston. I bought a new blazer, showed up with a donation envelope in my pocket, and stood there like an idiot for nearly an hour while she chatted with her classmates. Never introduced me to anyone. Never acknowledged I had flown across the country. When I finally walked up to her to say hi, she glanced over her shoulder and gave me this tight little smile, like I was someone's awkward cousin who wandered in off the street. I remember standing near the snack table, watching her laugh with a group of people, all of them in heels and polished suits, and realizing I wasn't part of her world. But I still paid her rent that month. Then there was her birthday the year after. She invited our parents and a few of her friends to a rooftop brunch. I found out about it on Instagram. Someone tagged her in a photo. I asked her about it and she said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd want to come." It was mostly people from school. I didn't even argue. I just wired her $150 the next week for a textbook she said she needed. And most glaring of all, she never introduced me to Austin. Not once. I didn't even know his name until Kayla said it out loud. There were pictures on Facebook, sure. Vacation shots, fancy dinners, the two of them all dressed up at some gala or other. But never a call, never a message saying, "Hey Zach, meet my boyfriend." I paid for her flights to visit him over the summer. Paid for her phone bill, her car maintenance, even covered her security deposit when she moved into a new place with a better parking situation. But the second she started dating someone with a last name that got people's attention, I became invisible. And it wasn't just her. That was the part that made my stomach turn. My parents went along with it. They didn't just allow the exclusion. They helped enforce it. They made the call. They delivered the message. They didn't question why their daughter wanted her brother kept away from the family table. They didn't defend me. They didn't hesitate. If I was too embarrassing to be invited to Christmas, then my money should be too. I didn't say anything. I didn't warn her. I didn't draft a dramatic message or call anyone to explain. I just opened the tuition portal, stared at the $27,800 payment due for the spring semester, and closed the tab. That was it. 3 years of bank transfers, late-night emergencies, textbook receipts, licensing exam fees. Done. If I wasn't worthy of being in the room, then I wasn't going to fund the lights that kept it warm. And the thing is, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. A few days after I made the decision to stop paying, I got a text from Melanie. "Hey, just checking, tuition's due this Friday. Can you confirm it'll go through?" No greeting, no context, no hint that anything had changed since Christmas. Just the same casual expectation that I'd open my wallet and make it happen. This time, I didn't ignore it. I called her. Straight up. No texting. No dancing around it. When she answered, she sounded chipper, fake sweet in that way she always does when she wants something. "Hey Zach. What's up?" "I'm not paying your tuition," I said, calmly, clearly. There was silence on the other end. Then she laughed. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done," I said. "I'm not sending another dime. The $27,800 for spring? You're on your own." She didn't respond right away. I could practically hear the gears turning. "Wait, is this a joke?" "No," I said. "It's not. If I'm too embarrassing to be at Christmas, then my money is too." And that's when the mask cracked. She started with the denial. "Zach, I never said that. That's not what happened. I never said you were embarrassing. Kayla told me everything," I said. "You didn't want me there because you were afraid I'd make a bad impression on your boyfriend. Because my job's not professional enough." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "You're twisting it. I just meant you know how mom and dad get. I didn't want any drama." "Then you should have uninvited them," I said. "Because the only person who hasn't caused drama is the one footing your bills." She tried pivoting. "You know how much pressure I'm under. Dental school is brutal, and Austin's parents are intense. I just didn't want anything to go wrong. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I didn't say anything." She went quiet for a second, then switched tactic. "Okay, look. I'm sorry if that's how it came across. But I need this semester. I can't afford to drop out. If you stop now, everything I've worked for is over." "You should have thought of that before you made me the problem," I said. She went quiet again. And then the waterworks started. "I don't know why you're doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "I've worked so hard. You know I'm going to pay you back one day. I swear. I just need you to help me finish." "You said that 2 years ago," I replied. "And no one in this family's said thank you since." She got angry then. "You don't get to act like a victim, Zach. You've always had money. You're living in Seattle with your fancy business. I'm drowning here. This is life and death for me." That's when I knew it wasn't just about entitlement. It was about control. She saw my help as a given. Something she was owed. And the second I removed it, I became the villain. I ended the call. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Mom. "Zach, what are you doing?" she said, her voice already in that guilt-heavy register she pulls out for serious lectures. "Melanie is devastated. She's falling apart. You can't just abandon her." "I didn't abandon her," I said. "I carried her. For 3 years. Over 200 grand. Without a single thank you. She's under pressure, Mom said. She didn't mean what she said. You can't punish her for a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. She made it clear. I'm not good enough to sit at the table, but my money's fine. Mom sighed. You're being cold. This isn't like you. No, I said. This is exactly like me. I'm done being used. And then she said something that made my blood boil. She's your sister. Family means showing up when it's hard. I almost laughed. You mean like I wasn't allowed to do at Christmas? She didn't respond. Then Dad called. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me wanted to hear what he had to say. It wasn't subtle. He opened with, "What the hell are you thinking?" I stayed quiet. You're going to throw away her future over hurt feelings? I'm not throwing away anything, I said. I'm finally stepping back and letting the people who care so much figure it out for themselves. He didn't like that. This is selfish, he snapped. You've got more money than all of us combined. And you're choosing now to make some grand statement. She made the statement, I said. You delivered it. I'm just listening to it. No one asked you to pay in the first place, he said. You offered. Don't turn around now and act like you're a saint. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. You're right. No one asked. And no one thanked me, either. Grow up, he barked. This isn't about gratitude. It's about responsibility. No, I said. It's about boundaries. And I'm finally setting mine. He hung up on me. Since then, it's been silent. No one apologized. No one admitted what really happened. No one offered to help cover tuition, either. They all just condemned me. Cast me as the villain who dared to stop paying for a system that didn't respect me. But I've got peace now. For the first time in years, I'm not checking my bank account for Melanie's rent. Not fielding panicked calls about textbook fees or emergency expenses. I'm not waiting for the next request that comes with no acknowledgement, no thanks, just assumption. And I keep thinking the same thing, over and over. If I was too embarrassing to invite to Christmas, then my money was too. It didn't happen all at once. At first, things went quiet after I cut off the tuition payment. I stopped responding to text. I didn't return voicemails. I figured that was it. They'd freeze me out like they always did when I stopped doing what they wanted. But then, 2 weeks into January, I got a text from Kayla again. All it said was, "You're not going to believe this. Call me." I did. She picked up immediately. Austin dumped Melanie. I sat down. Wait, what? She told her parents last night. They're freaking out. Apparently, he found out everything. The Christmas thing. The tuition. The way she talked about you. How? I asked. His uncle, she said. That's the wild part. His uncle heard about the drama. Something about Melanie telling one of her classmates that her tech-bro brother was cut from the family dinner to protect her image. It got around. You know how it is with med and dental students. Gossip flies. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. Anyway, Austin's uncle is a retired electrician. Built his own construction company from nothing. One of those guys who work 2 jobs while raising a family. Austin looks up to him big time. So when he heard Melanie was embarrassed by you because you run your own business and don't have a degree from a traditional school, it didn't sit right with him. Did he talk to her? I asked. Yeah, Kayla said. Austin confronted her about it. Asked why she thought her brother's work was less worthy just because it wasn't academic or hospital-based. She apparently tried to spin it, said you were dramatic, that it was all exaggerated, that she never said anything bad about you. And he didn't buy it? Not for a second, she said. He told her if she could take that much money from you without any gratitude, and then talk about you like you were beneath her, he didn't want to be part of that. I sat back and exhaled. Not because I felt vindicated, but because for once someone outside our family finally saw what was really going on. He left, Kayla said. Packed his stuff, ended it clean. Didn't even give her room to negotiate. That should have been enough. But Melanie's world didn't just fall apart personally, it imploded professionally too. Without the tuition money, she tried everything to stay enrolled. She applied for emergency loans, but her debt-to-income ratio was already way too high. She reached out to private lenders, but none of them would approve without a cosigner. And here's the kicker, our parents couldn't do it. Their credit's decent, but they're still paying off Greg's med school bills and a second mortgage they took on a few years back when Dad's clinic had a rough patch. They were already stretched thin from helping Lauren with her law school loans. No one had room for another financial obligation. So with no cosigner, no savings, and no fallback plan, Melanie was forced to withdraw from dental school. Just like that. 3.5 years of training gone. Not because she wasn't smart. Not because she didn't work hard, but because she played herself. She gambled on status and appearances, burned the only bridge holding her above water, and found herself on the ground with no one to catch her. Word got around fast in the family. I started getting messages again. Not apologies, not remorse, just noise. Greg sent a passive-aggressive text. Hope you're happy. Lauren followed with, you didn't have to ruin her life. Mom left me a voicemail sobbing about how everything is falling apart, but never once said she was sorry. Dad, as usual, didn't bother trying to be subtle. He called me a disgrace. Said I had turned my back on the family. But none of them offered to help Melanie. Not one of them stepped up to cover even part of her tuition. They wanted to use me as the scapegoat without lifting a finger to fix the mess themselves. And the truth is, I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending. I hadn't heard from Melanie in almost 3 weeks. After Austin dumped her and the tuition money dried up, the family meltdown kind of went quiet. I figured she was either regrouping or ignoring me altogether. Either way, I was fine with it. I was back to focusing on work, feeling more grounded than I had in a long time. My team was wrapping up a major redesign for a longtime client, an older woman named Lorraine who ran a nonprofit out of Tacoma. Sweet, sharp, no-nonsense type. She was in her 70s, but she had more energy than half my staff. We were doing a presentation for her in the office that day, showing off some of the branding work and interface updates. The meeting was going great. I was standing near the screen explaining some layout logic when the front door slammed open. At first, I thought maybe someone had tripped or dropped something in the hallway. But then I heard the voice. Where is he? I turned around, and there was Melanie, standing in the lobby of my office, red-faced, eyes wild, clutching her phone in one hand and a manila folder in the other. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I tried to stay calm. Melanie, what are you doing here? You won't answer my texts, she shouted, loud enough that everyone in the room stopped moving. You think you can just cut me off and pretend I don't exist? Lorraine looked at me, eyebrows raised. My project manager, David, instinctively stood up from his chair. I'm in the middle of a meeting, I said. Yeah, I can see that, she snapped. Perfect little tech guy in his little startup bubble. Did you tell them how you abandoned your sister? How you ruined my life? I didn't say anything. She looked around the room and stepped further in. You all work for him? You think he's some kind of hero? He left me with nothing. He lied to my boyfriend, turned my parents against me, and now he's sitting here like he's better than everyone else. No one responded. She held up the manila folder. I've got proof. I'll go public if I have to. I'll tell everyone how abusive you've been. Emotionally manipulative. Controlling. I'll ruin your business if you don't fix this. It was silent. Completely silent. And then Lorraine, God bless this woman, stood up. She walked right past me, looked Melanie in the eye and said, Young lady, I don't know what's going on between you and your brother, and frankly, I don't care. But I've been around long enough to spot a temper tantrum dressed up as a victim's speech. If you want someone to feel sorry for you, you've come to the wrong room. Melanie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. You barge in here, screaming like a child, trying to shame the person who kept you afloat? No. That's not courage. That's entitlement, Lorraine said. He might not be perfect, but this man's been working with me for years. He treats people with respect, builds something out of nothing, and creates jobs for people. That's more than most can say. It was like someone poured cold water over the whole room. Melanie turned to me, eyes wide, suddenly aware of how quiet it had gotten. David stepped up next to me. He didn't say much. Just looked at her and said, We're here because of him. He's the reason any of us are working right now. Maybe try remembering that. Melanie's face twisted like she was about to cry or scream, maybe both. But instead, she tried one last desperate move. You don't get to erase me, Zach, she said. You think ignoring me is going to make this go away? I'll burn your name down if I have to. I looked at her, calmly. Then I said, That's enough. She stared at me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give her one. You need to leave, I said. This isn't the place for this. You don't get to storm in here and throw a fit in front of my team and my client. You made your choices. Now you live with them. She didn't move. So I walked past her, opened the front door, and held it. Eventually, she walked out. That was the last time I spoke to her. I blocked her number. Told my assistant not to take any more calls from unknown numbers that sounded like her. I didn't respond to the emails that followed, just vague threats and rants typed in all cap. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. Because for the first time in a long time, I had clarity. If being too embarrassing for a holiday dinner disqualified me from their world, then I had every right to disqualify them from mine. And this time, I finally meant it. After Melanie's meltdown in my office, I figured that would be the end of it. She'd made a scene, threatened me, and burned whatever was left of the bridge between us. But she still had one last move up her sleeve, and of course it backfired. A few weeks later, I got a text from Kayla again. She didn't even bother with small talk this time. "You are not going to believe what Melanie did now," she wrote. I called her immediately, half dreading what I was about to hear. Apparently, Melanie reached out to Austin's family. Yes, the same family she had tried to impress by pretending I didn't exist. She showed up unannounced at a small family brunch his parents were hosting in Boston. She spun a whole story, claiming the breakup had been a misunderstanding and that she had been framed by her jealous brother who was threatened by her success. She asked them if they could help her financially, just enough to get back into dental school. Said it was only a short-term setback. Unfortunately for her, Austin's dad, who happens to be a judge, was there. He listened to her calmly, asked a few questions, and let her finish. Then, without raising his voice or even looking angry, he said something that Kayla told me pretty much ended it on the spot. He looked her dead in the eye and said, "Manipulation is not a good start for a future lawyer." That was it. She left humiliated. Whatever chance she thought she had of salvaging that relationship or spinning the narrative her way was gone. Since then, things have been quiet. Melanie ended up taking a job as a dental assistant at a small clinic in Providence. According to what I've heard from mutual connections, she tells everyone it's temporary. That she's taking a gap year before she re-enrolls. But the reality is, no school will take her back without a clean financial record, and she's got none of the money, credit, or support left to make that happen. She's still holding on to the image, but the foundation has completely cracked. As for me, I'm doing better than I ever have. In the past 6 months, my business has grown like crazy. We opened a second office in Portland and brought on 6 new full-time employees. Our client base doubled after a few referrals from one of our bigger tech partners, and we've started expanding into app development and platform support. It's been the kind of growth I used to only dream about. And here's the unexpected part: Austin and I actually stayed in touch. He reached out not long after everything happened, mostly just to say he was sorry things turned out the way they did. We grabbed a beer when he was in Seattle, and now, every couple months, we catch up. Sometimes his uncle joins us, and the three of us talk business, life, whatever. They're good people. Real people. The kind who value work, effort, and integrity over image. I haven't spoken to Melanie since she stormed out of my office. She tried, once or twice, sent me a few emails filled with vague threats, claimed she would expose me, that she'd make sure everyone knew how unstable I was. She threw around phrases like defamation, manipulation, emotional abuse. But I didn't reply. I didn't acknowledge it. Because when someone shows you exactly who they are, the only move left is to stop giving them access to your time, your peace, and your future. She wanted to make me angry. Instead, I disappeared from her life like she tried to do to mine. And that was the difference. She thought cutting me out would cost me something. But it turns out I was the only one holding anything up in the first place.